7 days. That's all it took to blow up the map for control of the United States Senate. A leading Senate candidate dropped out of his own race, a sitting senator died in the middle of his re-election campaign, and a fresh wave of polling landed in states that weren't even on anyone's radar a month ago. By the time you finish this video, you're going to understand exactly why one state in the industrial Midwest might be the single most important race in the entire country, and why Democrats have real reason to be nervous heading into 2026. Before we start filling in states, let's set up the board, because there's a piece of conventional wisdom that gets repeated every single midterm cycle, and it's usually true. The president's party loses ground in midterms. That's been the pattern for generations. The White House party gets punished, the other side gets energized, and the map swings against them. Everyone assumed the same thing would happen to Republicans heading into 2026. But here's what a lot of national coverage keeps missing. The Senate doesn't run on national mood. It runs on which 33 or so seats happen to be up in any given cycle. And this year, the seats up for grabs are brutal for Democrats. They're defending a pile of states Trump carried, while almost every Republican seat on the map sits in solid red territory. Keep that in mind, because by the end of this video, I'll show you the one race that could shut the door on a Democratic takeover completely, and why the polling in that state might actually still be underselling the Republican. Let's start with the Republican foundation, because it's not close. Out west, Idaho isn't a race, it's a formality. Jim Risch is sitting on a lead north of 35 points. Wyoming, the reddest state in the country, is sending Harriet Hageman to the Senate to replace the retiring Cynthia Lummis. No drama at all. South Dakota has Mike Rounds up around 24. Oklahoma, safe. Arkansas has Tom Cotton cruising toward a third term up somewhere around 18 points. Louisiana, safe. West Virginia, Tennessee, and Alabama are all Republican strongholds clearing 15-point margins without even trying. Montana is worth a slightly longer look because it's an open seat. Steve Daines is retiring, and the Republican running to replace him is Kurt Alme, the former U.S. attorney for the state. His opposition isn't even a Democrat, it's an independent, Bill Bodner, a former University of Montana president. Even against an independent with a legitimate resume, Alme is up more than 20 points. Open seat, no incumbent, and Montana still doesn't budge from red. Democrats have their own fortress states, and I'll be just as straightforward about those. Oregon isn't moving. Ron Wyden coasts. Illinois stays solid blue as Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton takes over the seat Dick Durbin held for 3 decades. Massachusetts has Ed Markey up over 20. Rhode Island has Jack Reed comfortably ahead. New Jersey and Delaware will send Cory Booker and Chris Coons back with room to spare. Colorado and New Mexico don't have much public polling yet, but John Hickenlooper and Ben Ray Lujan are both heavy favorites. And Virginia currently shows Mark Warner up around 19 points as he goes for a 4th term. That margin will almost certainly tighten as more polling comes in, but nobody serious expects that seat to flip. Okay, that's the boring part out of the way, the states that were never really in question. Now we get into the actual battlegrounds, the seats that are close, the ones that could flip, and the 2 states that turned this entire cycle upside down in the span of a single week. First stop, Nebraska. On paper, this should be an afterthought. It's Nebraska. But independent Dan Osborn is running again, this time against Republican incumbent Pete Ricketts, and Osborn is the only reason this state isn't already painted solid red. Here's why I'm not particularly worried about it. Osborn already ran this exact playbook once before against Deb Fischer, generated a ton of buzz and media attention, and still lost by more than 6 points. Ricketts currently leads by roughly 5 points in the polling average. This moves from safe to lean red, but lean red still means red. Ricketts gets his first full term. Kansas is a similar story with a different cause. Roger Marshall isn't exactly a beloved incumbent, and his numbers are softer than you'd expect for a Republican in Kansas. But soft is relative here. He's still ahead of Democrat Adam Hamilton by roughly 8 points, and Kansas simply doesn't send Democrats to the Senate. Likely red, Marshall wins a 2nd term. Now Texas, and this one's genuinely interesting. Ken Paxton beat sitting Senator John Cornyn in the Republican primary runoff, so he's the nominee now, and he's facing Democrat James Talarico, who has generated a wave of enthusiasm on the left. The public polling shows this race is tight, so should Republicans be worried? History has an answer for that. Back in 2018, the entire political press was convinced Beto O'Rourke was about to knock off Ted Cruz. Record-breaking fundraising, packed rallies, wall-to-wall coverage. Cruz won by nearly 3 points anyway. That's the pattern in Texas. Democrats close the polling gap, dominate the online buzz, and then come up short on election night. And the underlying trend has only shifted further right since then. Trump won Texas by under 6 points in 2020 and by nearly 14 points in 2024. That's a state accelerating toward the GOP, not away from it. Paxton has led throughout the campaign. Lean red, and Talarico becomes one more name on the list of Texas Democrats who looked great in the headlines and fell short on election night. Head north to Alaska, currently the second closest race in the entire country. Mary Peltola, a genuinely strong candidate by Alaska Democratic standards, is challenging incumbent Dan Sullivan, and the polling average has Sullivan up by less than a single point. So why not panic about this one? Because Alaska has a very specific political personality. It loves independence, it loves splitting tickets down the ballot, and it almost never actually sends a Democrat to the U.S. Senate. Trump carried the state by more than 13 points last time around. Peltola will make Sullivan sweat for it, and Republicans should absolutely take it seriously. But tilt red is the right call here. Sullivan survives. Iowa. Joni Ernst is out, and Congresswoman Ashley Hinson is running to keep the seat red against Democrat Josh Turek. The average has Hinson up by only around 3 points, and that number is going to generate a lot of overheated headlines on its own. Here's context those headlines will skip. Part of that tightening is spillover from a genuinely competitive governor's race in the state, which is inflating Democratic numbers down the ballot. And more importantly, Iowa polling has a long, well-documented habit of underestimating Republicans. Ask anyone who watched the final Iowa polls in recent presidential cycles and then watched Trump win the state by double digits. He carried it by 13 points in 2024. A state like that isn't about to elect a Democratic senator in this environment. Lean red on the map, but Hinson is in a considerably stronger position than a 3-point lead suggests. Ohio, and this one's a special election, which makes it spicier than usual. Jon Husted is defending the 2 years remaining on the term J.D. Vance vacated, and Democrats recruited the biggest name they had left, Sherrod Brown, the former 3-term senator. On the surface, that sounds terrifying for Republicans. Brown won statewide 3 separate times. But think through what actually just happened to Sherrod Brown. He was the incumbent in 2024 with every advantage incumbency provides, and Ohio voters fired him anyway. He's not walking back in as a conquering hero, he's the guy the state just voted out, asking for the job back 2 years later. Husted has held a steady lead for 6 months and currently sits around 3 points ahead. Structurally, Ohio isn't a swing state anymore either. Trump beat Kamala Harris there by 11 points. Brown will make this the most expensive Senate race in Ohio history, but the data says lean red, and Husted holds. Now we cross into the part of the map where things get genuinely wild, because everything up to this point has been Republicans playing defense. From here on, we're talking about Democratic territory that is suddenly, shockingly, in play. Start with Minnesota. Yes, Minnesota. Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan is on track to be the Democratic nominee, facing Republican Michelle Tafoya, the former network sports broadcaster. The gap between them right now sits at around 3.5 points. In Minnesota. Let that sink in for a second. Democrats haven't lost a presidential race there since 1972, the longest blue streak in the country. But that streak has been living on borrowed time for a while. In 2024, with Minnesota's own sitting governor literally on the national Democratic ticket as the vice presidential nominee, Kamala Harris only carried the state by about 4 points. The firewall is a lot thinner than its reputation suggests. For now, the honest rating is lean blue. A lead is a lead, but if Tafoya runs a disciplined campaign, this becomes a legitimate flip opportunity, and every dollar Democrats have to spend defending Minnesota is a dollar they can't spend somewhere like Michigan or Georgia. Circle this one. New Hampshire. Jeanne Shaheen is retiring, and the matchup is Democrat Chris Pappas against Republican John Sununu. Here's a piece of history that makes this one almost poetic. Sununu is the man Shaheen originally beat to win this seat back in 2008, in the middle of a massive Democratic wave nationally. 18 years later, he wants it back. Pappas leads by around 5 points in the average, which barely clears the bar for likely blue. But don't write Sununu off entirely. Harris only won New Hampshire by under 3 points, and the state has elected Republican governors continuously for a decade. The DNA for a Sununu comeback is there. Likely blue for now, worth watching closely all year. Georgia. Jon Ossoff is the single most vulnerable Democratic incumbent in the entire country, running for a second term against Republican Mike Collins. Right now, Ossoff leads by around 4 points, so the honest rating is lean blue. But nobody, and I mean nobody, believes Georgia finishes as a comfortable single-digit race. This is the state that decided the closest presidential contest in the nation in 2020, and then swung right back to Trump in 2024. Georgia doesn't do comfortable margins, ever. Ossoff gets the incumbent's edge in today's rating, but Mike Collins has a completely real path to flipping this seat, and if election night runs long anywhere in the country, Georgia is probably the reason why. And North Carolina. This is the Democrats' best pickup opportunity on the entire map, and it's a strong one. Tom Tillis is retiring after 2 terms, and Democrats recruited former Governor Roy Cooper, one of the most popular political figures in the state, to run against Republican Michael Whatley, the former RNC chair. Whatley is a capable operator, but he's running against essentially universal name recognition. Cooper leads by around 6.5 points, likely blue. Republicans would obviously love to hold this one, but here's the strategic reality that should calm Republican nerves a little. The GOP doesn't actually need North Carolina to keep Senate control. They have multiple independent paths to 50 seats without it. Democrats, on the other hand, need almost everything else on this map to break their way. Cooper flips it, and it barely dents the overall math. Which brings us to the 2 states that turned the last 7 days into complete chaos. Maine first. Graham Plattner won the Democratic primary back in June and became the nominee to challenge Susan Collins. Then, in early July, a woman he had previously dated came forward with a sexual assault accusation, which Plattner denies. His support inside his own party collapsed almost overnight. Top Democrats pulled their endorsements, and by mid-July he had formally withdrawn from the race. Because he dropped out before Maine's legal deadline, the state Democratic Party gets to select a replacement nominee. Here's the part most people don't realize, though. Regular Maine Democratic voters don't get a say in that replacement. There's no new primary. Instead, party delegates, somewhere in the range of 500 to 600 of them, will gather at a nominating convention in late July to pick the new nominee themselves. Early polling of Democratic voters shows a clear frontrunner, former state Senate President Troy Jackson, sitting around 40%, well ahead of the rest of the field, and betting markets currently give him roughly a 3 in 4 shot at the nomination. So how does Jackson stack up against Collins? Multiple fresh polls over the past week now show Collins leading him by about 3 points. And if you know anything about Susan Collins's political history, a 3-point lead in July should genuinely worry Democrats, because she is arguably the single most underestimated politician in the country. Back in 2020, Collins trailed in virtually every public poll released the entire year. Forecasters had her buried, and she won by nearly 9 points anyway. Maine polling has never once fully captured her personal brand strength, so when she's already ahead by 3 points before Democrats have even officially picked their nominee, while the other side is still cleaning up the wreckage of a scandal, you understand why this seat moves to lean Republican. Collins is on track for a 6th term, and the seat Democrats spent the entire year calling their top target is slipping away from them. Then came the second gut punch. Lindsey Graham, in the middle of his own re-election campaign and fresh off a trip to Ukraine, died suddenly at 71. His office attributed it to a brief, sudden illness, with a preliminary finding of an aortic dissection. President Trump, who had reportedly spoken with him that same evening, publicly called him one of the finest people and senators he had known. Whatever your politics, the man served South Carolina for 3 decades, and tributes poured in from both sides of the aisle. On the day he passed, Graham held about a 7-point lead in his re-election polling average. So what happens to the seat now? South Carolina is handling this completely differently than Maine, and the contrast between the 2 processes tells you a lot about how each party operates. No closed convention, no room full of delegates deciding for everyone else. Republicans are holding an open special primary on August 11th, where actual Republican voters across the state choose the nominee themselves. The early frontrunner is Congressman Russell Fry, who prediction markets currently give roughly a 60% chance of winning that primary. and whoever wins it starts as an overwhelming favorite in the general election. Because here's the context that matters more than any single poll. South Carolina hasn't elected a Democrat to the U.S. Senate since 1998, nearly 3 decades of uninterrupted Republican control of that seat. A tragedy scrambled the calendar here, but it hasn't touched the underlying fundamentals. Likely Republican, and the seat stays red.
All right, I told you there was one race that decides everything, and now that the rest of the board is filled in, you can see exactly why it matters more than all the others combined. Michigan. Gary Peters is retiring, which opened the door. The Republican nominee is Mike Rogers, the former congressman and House Intelligence Committee chairman, facing Democrat Abdul El-Sayed. For most of this year, Rogers held a comfortable lead, at times north of 5 points. That lead has now compressed down to a fraction of a single point, basically a dead heat. So why do I still think this is the flip of the cycle? 2 reasons, and the second one should genuinely worry Democratic strategists more than anything else on this entire map. Reason 1 is the trajectory of the state itself. Michigan went for Trump in 2016, the first time it had backed a Republican for president in nearly 30 years. It swung to Biden in 2020, then swung right back to Trump in 2024. This isn't a blue state that occasionally wobbles anymore. It's a genuine coin flip state. And in a coin flip state, an open seat with 0 incumbent advantage is about the best possible scenario for the challenging party. Reason 2 is the streak almost nobody talks about. Michigan has not elected a Republican to the United States Senate since 1994. Sit with that for a second. Over 3 decades, through wave elections in both directions, through cycles where Republicans swept everything else on the ballot in that state, that particular Senate streak held every single time. Which means Mike Rogers isn't just running for one seat. He's trying to break a 30-year curse in a state Trump just carried against a nominee from the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, with even a slim polling edge currently in his favor. Based on where the numbers sit right now, Michigan goes tilt Republican. It's the flip of this entire cycle. And if Rogers holds on, the path for Democrats to retake the Senate before the end of Trump's term doesn't just get difficult, it becomes close to mathematically impossible. So let's add up the whole board. Republicans hold Texas, Alaska, Iowa, Ohio, Nebraska, and Kansas. They hold Florida, too, where appointed incumbent Ashley Moody leads by close to 5 points in a state that flat-out isn't purple anymore. They hold Maine with Collins, and they hold South Carolina once the August 11th primary settles the field. Democrats hold their fortress states, hang on to Georgia, Minnesota, and New Hampshire for now, and flip North Carolina with Roy Cooper. Republicans flip Michigan. Final projected count, 53 Republican seats to 47 Democratic seats. The GOP doesn't just keep the Senate majority. They come out of a midterm cycle that's supposed to punish the president's party with that majority fully intact. And here's why that outcome would actually be historically remarkable if it holds. The president's party almost always bleeds Senate seats in midterms. That's just the underlying gravity of American politics. But there is precedent for defying it, and it happened recently. In 2018, Democrats won the House in a genuine blue wave, and Republicans still gained Senate seats that very same night, because the specific seats up for grabs that cycle happened to be stacked in their favor. 2026 is shaping up to rhyme with exactly that. The national mood can be whatever it's going to be on any given week, but the actual seats in play this cycle run straight through states Trump won by 11, 13, 14 points. Democrats can win the news cycle every single week between now and November and still lose the only map that actually decides who runs the Senate. That's not spin, that's just arithmetic. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me which state on this map you think I've got wrong. Michigan? Georgia? Maine? Make your case. I read every one of them. And if this breakdown was useful, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the second new polling drops in any of these races, I'll be back here breaking it down. This map is going to keep shifting between now and November, and we're going to track every single move together.